Hi, I'm Kaylin. And 3 hours before my sister tore the front of my dress off in front of our entire family, she handed me another one, with a smile on her face and war at her eyes. I stood in the guest room holding the dress I'd chosen hours earlier, the one soft thing I allowed myself this month. The late day light slipped through the blinds in narrow bars, cutting across the fabric like quiet warnings. I ran my thumb along the sleeve, trying to remember the last time I picked something because I liked it, not because it kept the peace. I didn't hear Sold's footsteps, just the click of the door swinging open like she owned the air in front of me.
She didn't ask.
She never asked. That one's too forward, she said, placing a beige dress on the bed as if she were dropping evidence. Wear this instead. Her tone carried that smooth, practiced sweetness women use when they want the world to believe they're the reasonable one. It's a family barbecue, Kaylin, not prom night. My fingers tightened around the ivory wrap dress. I could feel my pulse at the base of each knuckle. I thought it was appropriate. Her smile thinned. Well, think again. I held the new dress, its dull fabric cold at the seams, and something inside me shifted, small, quiet, but sharp. I didn't protest. I didn't dare. I slipped into the beige one and pulled the zipper up. It snagged halfway, like the dress itself was resisting her choice. I tugged harder. Maybe it knew I didn't choose it. Looking back now, that was the first moment I should have turned around and left. That's where it all started. I stepped into the living room and saw the easel board propped against the wall. Valora and Isolde huddled beside the laptop, clicking through photos for the slideshow we'd play tonight. I recognized the frames instantly. Birthdays, recitals, the usual curated memories that made our family seem more whole than we really were. My stomach tightened when I saw the first picture. Last year's recital. I had stood on the right side of the shot holding Lunette's flowers. In this version, my shoulder was gone, cropped clean out. In the next photo, someone had replaced me with a potted fern. Same pose, same lighting, just not me. Where's the original? My voice came out softer than I intended. Valora didn't look at me. It looked cluttered, honey. Don't overthink it. I didn't overthink it. I understood it. I wasn't forgotten. I was removed with purpose. Even then, I didn't confront her. I told myself it wasn't worth it. I told myself that keeping the peace was better than challenging the hierarchy I didn't build. But a small ache formed behind my ribs, the kind that spreads before you even know it's happening. I should have seen it coming. Outside, the heat lingered on the stone tiles as tents went up and coolers thumped open. The air smelled like charcoal, sunscreen, and the first notes of evening. I passed by the long table, noticing the place cards neatly arranged. My tag read K, prep staff. My full name wasn't there, not even the shortened version I liked. Just K. The girl who blended in. The girl no one introduced. I adjusted the centerpiece, sunflowers bending slightly in the wind, and heard Isolde's laugh drift across the yard. She was talking to one of her friends, her voice sharp enough to slice even the air. She's staying with us until she figures things out. You know how she is. Her friend murmured something sympathetic, the kind people offer when they don't know the story but like the drama anyway. I felt my jaw tighten. Not a guest. Not family. Not hired. A placeholder. A temporary inconvenience wrapped in borrowed fabric. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. When the setup was done, I slipped behind the rosebush to breathe. The petals brushed my arm, cool against skin still warm from the sun. I smoothed the hem of the dress I hadn't chosen, watching neighbors walk in through the back gate with casseroles and lawn chairs. From inside the house, I heard my name, followed by laughter. Not loud, not cruel, just enough to land. If I left right then, would anyone notice? Or would that make it easier? The question hung in the air like smoke. And in that stillness, I realized something I had spent years refusing to admit. I didn't know where I belonged anymore, but it sure wasn't here. I stayed. And I wish I hadn't. The hallway felt tighter than usual as I walked back inside, the smell of lemon oil on the wood floors mixing with the burnt sweetness of early barbecue smoke wafting in from the patio. My fingers itched from holding in too many words, but my mouth stayed quiet. It always did, until it didn't. I carried a crate of sodas to the kitchen, set them by the fridge, and that's when I saw it. A small parcel on the sideboard, the kind of box that didn't announce itself, but still managed to feel personal. My name was on the label, written in a hand I knew well. Malrick's. Not messy, not dramatic. Just neat and careful. I didn't open it. I wasn't raised to assume anything was mine, even if it had my name on it. My fingers hovered above the edge of the cardboard before I turned away. That's when I heard her behind me. "Why is my husband sending you things?" I turned slowly, saw Isolde already holding the box, her thumb dragging across the shipping label like it personally offended her. Her eyes burned with that particular brand of rage she reserved for things she couldn't control. "I didn't ask for anything," I said. "You never do. That's your game." Her smile curled up like she was doing me a favor by not saying more. I looked at her hands gripping the box and wished, just for a second, that it would disappear between us, that I could shrink enough to vanish with it. Some gifts arrive wrapped in suspicion, not ribbon. That's what this felt like. The kitchen bustled with activity as Valora flipped through a laminated prep list. She was wearing the same apron she used every 4th of July, the one with embroidered peaches and a faded wine stain across the waistline. "Lunette, you're in charge of napkin folding," she said cheerily. "Isolde drinks. Kaylin." She passed me the list. I scanned it. My name wasn't there, not really. Not in the way names mean something. Instead, in the bottom corner, scribbled in bold marker, "KK, dessert table and trash rotation." I hadn't heard that nickname in years. Not since elementary school. Not since Isolde used it to mock my stutter in front of her friends at a birthday party. I never said anything then. I didn't now either. "Wasn't this supposed to be a family list?" I asked, my voice even. Valora didn't look up. "It's just a name, honey. Don't be so sensitive." Easy for her to say. She never had to live under a name that cut. Even if they forgot the hurt, I lived with the echo. Every syllable of it. Later, the kitchen warmed with sunset through the stained glass. Everything was cast in gold, like someone tried to paint over the tension. I reached for a glass bowl on the top shelf, standing on tiptoes. Isolde stepped behind me. Too close. Too deliberate. Her elbow clipped mine. The bowl slipped. The shatter cracked across the room like a gunshot. Glass bounced across tile, pieces skittering under the fridge. Valora didn't even look up. "Kaylin, can you be a little more careful?" Isolde didn't miss a beat.
She's always been like this.
Fragile things just don't suit her. I crouched to gather the shards, fingers trembling, each slice of silence sharper than the broken glass around me. No one sees who shoved. Only who knelt. I didn't realize it at the time, but something inside me was starting to stand, quietly. I stepped out onto the patio, needing space. The air had cooled just enough to sting. That's when I saw it again. The parcel. It sat on the kitchen counter, open now. Inside was a small folded note and a velvet box. I didn't touch it, just leaned in far enough to read the handwriting I already knew belonged to Malrick. "Thank you for what you did for Lunette. I never forgot." My throat tightened, not from sentiment, from fear. Because no matter how honest the words, in Isolde's mouth, they would never sound like gratitude. From the kitchen, her voice carried through the screen door. She's been playing sweet for years. But tonight, I'm done watching. She said it loud enough for everyone. That's how you start a war in my family. Her words were still hanging in the air when I stepped back outside, blending into the chatter like smoke slipping under a door. I felt them settle on my skin, heavy and acidic, the way insults do when they're dressed up as observations. I kept walking because stopping meant reacting, and reacting was something I couldn't afford. Not yet. The yard was filling up, guests moving like warm currents under the string lights, unaware that something in the house had already cracked. Valora tapped her glass at the center of the lawn, calling everyone closer. The sound was sharp, practiced, like someone used to being heard. I stepped closer out of instinct, the way a child steps into a family photo, even when she's not invited. The music softened behind us. Plates and forks stilled. "Before we start dinner," Valora said, smiling her polished smile, "I want to thank those who made this happen." My shoulders drew tight. It wasn't that I expected praise, I knew better than that. But standing there, waiting to be acknowledged in even the smallest way, felt like a test I didn't sign up for. She read the list. Isolde, Malric,
Thorn,
Lunette for her cookies, the florist, the rental crew. My name never came. Not whispered. Not implied. I'd ironed the linens they were thanking. I'd planted the flowers everyone said looked so fresh and charming. And still, the silence where my name should have been felt louder than the applause that followed. It's strange how being ignored can sting worse than being insulted. Looking back, I should have noticed how many times I'd accepted it. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. After dinner, the dessert table buzzed with compliments. Pie crusts flaking just right, whipped cream melting too quickly in the heat. I stood off to the side, stacking plates, letting the praise drift around me like pollen. Malric approached with a half smile. "You should say something," he murmured. "These are yours." I hesitated, then reached for the mic. I just wanted to say thank. Isolde cut in, her voice slicing straight through mine. "She's always been shy," she said lightly. "Let's not make her uncomfortable." The guests laughed, softly, politely, the way people laugh when they're told how to feel. My smile froze mid-curve. My hand lowered the mic, as if it had burned me. It wasn't shyness. It was being silenced so gently no one noticed, but me. I set the mic back on the table. I didn't realize it then, but that moment shifted something fragile inside me. That's where the real unraveling began. Later, I wandered toward the far end of the yard where a large poster board stood on an easel, bold letters reading "Family Contributors." It was decorated with ribbon and sunflowers, picturesque, thoughtful, curated like everything else Isolde touched. I scanned the list. Every name was written clearly, centered, bold, celebrated. Except mine. I leaned closer and saw faint ink behind the ribbon, half covered like someone had changed their mind halfway through writing it. Kaylin. Barely there, like an afterthought the marker regretted. I ran my finger across the letters once, then wiped them off entirely. Valora passed behind me, barely glancing. "Oh, did we miss something?"
Miss something.
As if skipping someone on purpose could be blamed on forgetfulness. "You didn't miss it. You skipped it. There's a difference." My throat tightened, not with tears, but with a truth I had swallowed too many times. I wasn't invisible. I was edited, adjusted, cropped out to fit the picture they wanted to keep. I should have seen how deep the pattern went. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. I moved to the farthest corner of the yard where the noise softened into background murmurs. The sky was turning the color of apricots, warm and fading. I sat on the cool bench, letting the evening air settle over me. The dress clung to me in ways I didn't choose, just as this family clung to its own hierarchy. Footsteps approached softly. Lunette stood in front of me holding a cupcake, her eyes wide with a kind of honesty adults rarely have left. "Did you know Grandma made a quilt with your name stitched in it?" she asked. My breath slowed. "No," I said. "I didn't know that." "She kept it in the attic," Lunette continued, "behind the red box. She said it was for the quiet one who saw too much." Her words reached deeper than any apology I'd been waiting for. The quiet one. The one who saw too much. The one they tried to make smaller because she saw what they ignored. I didn't realize until later how much truth a child can carry without understanding its weight. And I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The weight of Lunette's words stayed with me long after she ran back toward the picnic tables. I felt something shift, small, but enough to push my feet toward the house instead of the dessert line forming outside. If a child could see what the adults refused to, then maybe it was time I stopped pretending not to notice either. I slipped through the back door, letting it close softly behind me, the noise of the crowd fading into a dull hum as I climbed the stairs. The hallway upstairs held a different kind of quiet. Cooler, older, almost watchful. I pushed open the attic door, and the hinges groaned like they were warning me off. Dust floated in thin rays of light as I stepped inside, the scent of old pine and cardboard settling over my skin. I didn't bother turning on the overhead bulb. The dimness felt honest. I found the red plastic bins exactly where Lunette said they'd be. I knelt, fingers brushing past brittle wrapping paper and winter scarves no one used anymore. And then I felt it, the soft edge of fabric that didn't belong with the rest. I pulled out the quilt. It was folded perfectly, cleaner than anything stored this long had a right to be. The flannel was soft, patterned with faded violets. My breath caught when I saw my name stitched in tiny blue thread along the border. Not K. Not KK. My real name. The one I owned before anyone else claimed it. Inside the folds rested a small note, the handwriting unmistakable, my grandmother's careful script. For the one who watched and never asked, "You were never invisible to me." The air thickened around me. I sat back on my heels, holding the quilt against my chest. This was a gift no one else knew about. Maybe because no one else ever looked for it. Looking back now, that was when my anger stopped hiding under grief. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. I carried the quilt downstairs, taking it into the guest room to keep it safe. I laid it on the bed gently, like it was something living. As I turned, a faint buzzing broke the quiet. Isolde's phone lit up on the vanity, screen bright against the dim room. Normally, I would have walked away. But nothing about tonight felt normal. A message preview flashed. "Just wait for my toast. I'll make sure she won't show her face again." Another followed. "She's been too comfortable for too long." My pulse throbbed in my ears. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I tapped the screen and it unlocked. I shouldn't have known her password, but of course I did. Those of us raised to anticipate storms learn early how to read the clouds. Her group chat was filled with screenshots, each one uglier than the last. Saved drafts for a speech she intended to make tonight. A mock apology meant to paint her as the victim afterward. Even a caption she wrote for photos she planned to post, me picking up shattered glass in the kitchen. "She's unstable. Pray for our family." It wasn't jealousy. It was strategy. I wasn't her sister. I was her threat. I didn't realize it then, but this was the evidence she never meant me to find. That's when the balance began to shift. When I stepped back outside, twilight had deepened. Lanterns swung gently above the long tables, glowing like small moons. Every seat was full except one. The one with my name card from earlier. except the card was gone. In its place sat another guest's name. Someone I barely knew. Someone who arrived late and didn't help with a single thing. I stood there holding my plate, searching for a place not claimed by someone else. It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't still sting. But it did. More than it should have. Valora brushed past me, pausing only long enough to say, "You can sit with the kids if you'd like. They won't mind." I nodded, though the words landed like gravel. I walked toward the children's table, stood beside the empty chair, and didn't sit. I didn't belong here. I just didn't know they'd print that in ink. Looking back, that seat said more than any speech could have. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. I stepped into the shadowed corner of the yard near the smoker. The air was warmer there, wrapped in the scent of hickory and charred meat. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I'd taken. My thumb hovered for only a second before I sent the entire set to my own number, ensuring a backup. I didn't delete the messages. I wanted them intact, untouched, undeniable. "If she tries anything tonight," I whispered, the words meant for no one but myself, "I'm not walking away." Those weren't the words of someone looking for a fight. They were the words of someone finally done being pushed out of her own story. The air around me felt heavier after I sent those screenshots to myself, like the night had finally caught its breath and was waiting to see what I'd do with mine. I slipped my phone into my pocket and stepped back toward the glow of the yard, trying to steady the pulse beating at the base of my throat. I didn't raise my voice, but I raised the stakes. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. The children's table sat under a cluster of string lights, each bulb flickering as the breeze came in from the yard's edge. Lunette broke away from her cousins as soon as she saw me, clutching something behind her back. She stopped in front of me, cheeks flushed, breath uneven like she'd run farther than she meant to. "I made this," she whispered, placing a tiny box in my hands. "Mom doesn't know, but you're the only one who talks to me like I'm not in the way." Inside was a silver hairpin shaped like a small leaf, the kind a little girl would save her allowance to buy. A handwritten note lay folded inside. "Thanks for remembering me when no one else did." The words blurred for a moment before settling into me like a seed taking root. Some people leave bruises. Others leave reminders you matter. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head, letting that truth settle in my chest like a shield. That's where a new boundary began. Looking back, I should have noticed how much power a child's gratitude can carry. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. I moved toward the patio, the hum of conversation blending with clinking utensils and low music. Malric walked by carrying a stack of folded chairs. His sleeves were rolled, his expression unusually tense. For the first time that day, our eyes met without any noise between us. No interruptions, no sideways glances, no misunderstanding. He gave a single, deliberate nod. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have stepped in earlier." Something closer to, "I see what's happening. I won't pretend I don't." I didn't smile back. I just returned the nod, feeling something inside me settle, the way a door sounds when it finally clicks into place. He saw it too. He just hadn't said it yet. But maybe he would. That moment didn't fix anything, but it lit something steady in me. Something I didn't realize I'd been missing. I didn't realize it then, but acknowledgement can be louder than any shout. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. Inside the kitchen, the heat from the stove mixed with the scent of roast chicken and baked beans. I stepped in for a glass of water, my throat tightening from emotion more than thirst. Before I could reach the sink, Isolde appeared in the doorway, blocking the exit like she'd rehearsed it. "Well, look who's busy," she said, swirling wine in her glass. "Stirring things. This whole sweet girl act is getting old." I met her stare, refusing to step back first. You start something tonight, Isolde. I won't let it slide. Her eyebrows arched, amused. You gonna cry in front of everyone again? No, I said quietly. I'm going to let them watch what happens when I stop staying quiet. Her smile faltered, just a flicker, but I caught it. The kind of crack that forms when the person you're used to stepping on suddenly doesn't sink. Valora entered behind her carrying a stack of plates, overhearing nothing. Girls, move, please. Guests need refills. Isolde stepped aside with a stiff grin, but her eyes stayed locked on me.
Dark.
Calculating.
Threatened.
That was the first time she looked unsure of how the evening would end. Looking back now, I should have expected her to react like someone cornered. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. When I returned to the yard, the sunset had deepened into a muted orange, stretching long shadows across the grass. The guests had drifted into small groups, chatting and laughing, unaware of the storm forming at the center of the family they thought they knew. I walked to the long table and stood next to it, not behind it like earlier, where I blended into the work. I lifted my glass, feeling the cool rim against my fingers, but didn't drink. One more move, Isolde, I whispered to myself. Just one. I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to the version of myself that still believed silence kept me safe. The truth was simpler. Silence only kept her powerful. And tonight, I was finally choosing something else. The glass in my hand felt heavier than it should have as I stepped back toward the center of the yard, the hum of voices swelling around me like a tide about to turn. I kept hearing my own warning echo under my breath, not as a threat, but as a promise to myself. I wasn't choosing silence anymore. And something in me knew she felt that shift because the air changed when I walked back into the crowd. It wasn't in the conversations or the laughter. It was in the way heads turned just slightly, as if everyone sensed a fuse had already been lit. Lanterns flickered overhead, their warm glow trembling against the early night breeze. People gathered near the main table, waiting for the toast Valora insisted we always do at family events. I stood with my plate, unsure where to be, close enough to look involved, far enough not to be a target. But with Isolde, distance didn't matter. If she wanted an audience, she'd make one. She tapped her glass, the sound sharp enough to cut through every voice at once. All right, everyone, she said, smiling too hard. Let's take a moment. Valora looked proud. Thorn listened only out of habit, and Malric remained unreadable. I watched Isolde's posture, the way her chin lifted just slightly, her shoulders straightening like someone preparing for a performance they had rehearsed. There's a sound before a glass shatters. This was it. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. She finished her polite speech, gratitude to the guests, compliments about the weather, a joke about overcooking the chicken. But the shift happened in the spaces between her words. The soft drawl in her tone sharpened. Her eyes slid to mine with a sweetness that made my stomach knot. And now, she said, stepping toward me, a reminder that not everyone who dresses up belongs. Her smile never reached her eyes. Before I could breathe, she reached for my shoulder. Her fingers curled into the fabric. One yank. A rip so loud it cut straight through the music. The neckline tore down the front of my dress, fabric splitting like it had been waiting for this exact moment to fall apart. Plates clattered. Someone gasped. A glass hit the ground and rolled toward my feet. I didn't move. I didn't run. I didn't give her what she wanted. That's the price for eyeing someone else's husband, she said, voice dripping with manufactured innocence. My heart hammered, but my face stayed still. The night air hit my exposed skin, not cold, just startling enough to freeze the moment into something unforgettable. Eyes stared. Murmurs stirred. Looking back now, I should have known she'd go this far. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The yard went utterly silent. Not party silent. Funeral silent. Then Malric stepped forward. Not quickly. Not dramatically. He took each step like he'd counted them before moving, like he wanted her to feel the weight of every inch he closed between them. He shrugged off his jacket and placed it around my shoulders. His voice was quiet but carried farther than any shout. "You don't get to call that dignity," he said, looking at Isolde. "What you did is cruelty, and I won't stand behind it."
Silence deepened.
A few guests exchanged looks. Someone exhaled sharply. I felt the whole yard tilt. Isolde blinked, as if the world suddenly didn't obey her rules. "You're defending her?" In front of everyone. Malric didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to.
No.
"I'm defending the truth." I felt the jacket settle against my skin, heavy, warm, steadying. It wasn't just a jacket. It was the first time anyone covered me without asking me to shrink. I didn't realize it then, but this was the moment the power shifted, and not in the way Isolde imagined. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. I stood taller, fingers gripping the lapels of the jacket. Torn fabric clung beneath it, but I didn't hide it. I let everyone see exactly what she'd done. Valora's face drained of color. Thorne's jaw tightened. Even the guests who didn't know me suddenly looked at Isolde with a question in their eyes, a question she couldn't answer with charm, not anymore. I turned my gaze slowly, first to Valora, then to Thorne, letting them see the truth they'd ignored for too long. "Is this still what family looks like to you?" I asked. My voice didn't shake.
Hers did.
For a split second, everything in the yard held its breath. The quiet held for a beat too long, stretching thin across the yard like a wire ready to snap. My question hovered there, heavy, exposed, and the moment it left my lips, I felt every gaze shift, not toward me, but toward the person who had built her world on never being questioned. Isolde's smile collapsed first. Then Valora took one step forward. "That was too far, Isolde," she said, her voice unsteady. "Even for you." For a second, the lantern light clung to her face, making every line, every denial, every choice she'd made to keep the peace, visible. My mother wasn't known for taking sides. She was known for smoothing things over. For pretending cracks didn't mean anything as long as the picture looked whole. But she wasn't smoothing anything now. Isolde's face twisted. "Mom." Valora lifted a hand. "Not tonight." It was just one sentence. But in our family, that was an earthquake. Looking back now, that should have told me everything was shifting. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The crowd began murmuring, the hush breaking into low ripples of disbelief. I felt all of it, the surprise, the judgment, the sympathy nobody wanted to say out loud. But the sharpest thing was the absence behind Isolde. No one stepped toward her. No one tried to defend her. Even Thorne stared at the ground like he finally ran out of ways to excuse her behavior. And then Lunette broke through the adults, eyes red, cheeks flushed. She came straight to me, her small hand wrapping around my wrist with more certainty than most grown people managed. "Kaelin," she whispered, "can I go home with you tonight?" My breath left me in a small tremor. I knelt so we were eye level, brushing her hair from her forehead. "Why would you want that, sweetheart?" She swallowed hard. "Because you don't yell. You just listen." Behind her, Isolde snapped like she'd been stung. "Don't put my daughter in the middle of this." But Lunette spun, her little voice cracking. "You made it messy." The yard fell silent again, but this time it wasn't for me. It was for a 13-year-old who accidentally told the truth everyone else had been avoiding for years. Sometimes the truth wears pigtails and speaks in one-syllable sentences. And sometimes that truth hits harder than any accusation. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The weight of eyes on me became too much, and I stepped back into the house, leaving the noise behind. My heart thudded in a rhythm I knew too well, half fear, half resolve. The torn dress still clung to my skin beneath Malric's jacket. It felt like a wound exposed, fresh and burning. In the guest room, I opened the drawer where I'd left my overnight bag. My fingers brushed the soft yarn before I even saw it, the pale blue cardigan my grandmother knitted years ago. The one she said was for when the world feels colder than it should. I pulled it out slowly. The scent of lavender still clung to it, faint but familiar, like a hand on my shoulder telling me to breathe. Slipping it on, I felt the fabric settle around me. Not tight, not restrictive, just steady.
Honest. Mine.
The mirror didn't lie. The torn dress underneath. Malric's jacket folded on the chair. The cardigan wrapping me like a bandage I chose. The sweater didn't match the party, but it matched the woman I'd become. Looking back, I can still feel the thread of courage tightening inside me. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. When I stepped back outside, conversations faltered. People parted without speaking, as if I carried something fragile or dangerous. Maybe both. Thorn looked away when our eyes met, the shame finally catching up to him. Valora lifted a hand, unsure whether to reach for me or let me pass. Isolde sat alone at the edge of the patio, shoulders stiff, chin trembling with the realization that for the first time in her life, no one had moved to stand behind her. Not a friend, not a parent, not even her husband. The power she held so tightly had slipped through her fingers the moment she tore my dress. And everyone saw it. I walked past her, my voice low but certain. I won't be the one who stays quiet anymore. No one responded, not because they disagreed, but because they all knew silence had done enough damage already. When no one stepped in after my last words, the quiet felt like a curtain falling across the whole yard. It didn't feel victorious. It didn't feel loud. It felt like truth finally settling in the spaces where denial used to live. I walked a few steps toward the picnic tables, feeling every pair of eyes move with me. My cardigan rested steady on my shoulders, the soft yarn warming the tremble just beneath my ribs. The lanterns above swayed with the wind, casting uneven shadows across the tables. For the first time, I noticed how many guests were watching, not the food, not the decorations, but us. The facade was crumbling, and they could all see the cracks. What I didn't expect was what came next. Lunette sat near the buffet table, turning something over in her hand, her eyes darting between me and the house. When she finally stood and walked toward Valora, her steps were decisive in that unself-conscious way only a young girl can manage. She tugged lightly on Valora's sleeve. "I found this inside the quilt," she said. "I think Kaelin was supposed to get it." Valora blinked, confused, until Lunette pressed a folded slip of paper into her hand. I could see the faint blue ink even from several feet away. Valora's lips parted as she unfolded it. The paper shook, not dramatically, but enough to betray the truth she'd tried to keep steady. She read silently at first. Then her voice cracked. She wrote this before she passed. Everyone went still again. Night air thickened. Even the cicadas quieted, as if straining to hear. Valora, read aloud. "The dress belongs to Kaelin. She deserves to be remembered in something beautiful. Mom." A sharp breath escaped someone in the crowd. Maybe it was me. I wasn't defending a dress. I was defending the only memory that ever held me without judgment. Looking back now, that note was the match in the dry grass. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. People moved closer in small steps, forming a loose circle near the patio. Their whispers came in low waves: surprise, guilt, curiosity, shame. I could see Isolde's confidence draining from her face, her posture shrinking by the second. When she finally found her voice, it was thin and uneven. "That's not real." She never said that. Valora's stare hardened, something I hadn't seen from her since childhood. She didn't need to say it. She wrote it. "That's more than you've ever done for anyone." Isolde recoiled as though struck, her cheeks flushing under the lantern light. I stepped forward, feeling my heartbeat fall into a calm rhythm. Not angry, not shaking, just finally steady. From my pocket, I took a small envelope, the one I'd prepared hours earlier, thinking I might need it, but praying I wouldn't. I placed it in Isolde's hand gently, not forcefully. The truth didn't need to be shoved. She opened it. Screenshots. Her own words. Her plotted humiliation. Her fake apology post, drafted long before she tore my dress. "If you want to tell them the truth," I said, "I've already sent it to the family thread." Her mouth quivered. She looked around, searching for anyone, to back her up. No one stepped forward. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a drink. I gave her something worse, the truth in full color. I didn't realize it then, but this was the moment she understood she'd lost the room. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. Near the patio table, Thorne rose slowly from his chair. The man who'd mastered silence, who spent his life speaking only when necessary, looked at each of us with the weight of years behind his eyes. He didn't defend her. He didn't question me. He didn't play referee. He simply walked. Past Isolde, who reached toward him with a trembling hand. Past Valora, who held her breath this time instead of her tongue. Past the string lights swaying over the lawn. He reached the back door, paused only long enough to exhale, then disappeared inside. The soft click of the door closing was louder than any word he'd said in years. When the one who always said nothing walks away, it's the loudest sound in the world. Looking back, that was the moment she realized she'd broken something she couldn't fix. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. Guests began leaving quietly, offering uncertain hugs or awkward apologies. A few approached Isolde, but none stayed long. She sank onto the wooden bench, shoulders shaking. Not from remorse, but from the collapse of a kingdom she thought she'd built on loyalty instead of fear. No one joined her. No one offered a hand. I stood at the edge of the lawn, looking out over the remnants of a family gathering that had spiraled into truth. The lanterns flickered overhead, casting long shadows of everyone who was still there and everyone who wasn't. It didn't end with screaming, I said softly, more to myself than anyone else. It ended with no one left to scream for her. 3 months later, the backyard was quiet again. But nothing was the same. The wind moved differently through the trees outside my apartment, gentler somehow, or maybe just less filled with everything I used to carry. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, mug of coffee cradled between my palms, watching the sunlight crawl across the floor like it belonged there. A cardboard box sat half-packed by the window, flaps bent, waiting. Not for an exit, but for new beginnings I finally chose. I passed the chair where the quilt rested, folded with care, like someone was still watching over it. The stitching at the edge had frayed slightly, one thread pulled loose near my name. I didn't fix it. Some imperfections deserved to stay visible. On the wall across from me hung a framed photo, a candid shot taken by one of my students on the first week of school. I was mid-laugh, holding a book, surrounded by kids who didn't know what I came from. They just knew I showed up. It wasn't big. It wasn't loud. But it was mine. No one edited me out of this one. Looking back now, I don't know why it took so long to realize how little I'd been asking for. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The envelope arrived 2 days ago, cream-colored and unassuming. Valora's handwriting on the front looked tentative, like each letter had been tested before written. I let it sit unopened for hours before I finally sliced it open at the corner. She hadn't written much. "You were never the loud one," it began. "And I confused that with you not mattering. I was wrong." There was no apology for the barbecue. No mention of the dress, the guests, or the moments she chose to be still instead of stepping in. Just one sentence, scribbled smaller at the bottom of the page. "Please visit. I'd like to talk. Just us." I read it 3 times, waiting for something inside me to ache. But it didn't. What came instead was quieter, no fireworks, no tears.
Just a kind of release.
Forgiveness didn't come. But something else did, the end of waiting for it. I didn't realize it then, but that letter closed a door I didn't need to knock on again. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. A week ago, I visited the house one last time. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't bring boxes or plans or open wounds. Just the old sweater, folded in my bag. I placed it back in the guest room drawer, smoothing it once before letting the wood slide shut. The room hadn't changed. Same pale walls, same lamp with the flickering bulb. Nothing announced the shift, but it was there. Isolde was home. She walked past the hallway as I left the room, didn't speak, didn't look at me. That used to hurt. Now, it just felt like silence returning to the only person who ever wielded it like a blade. Lunette caught me at the front door, her arms tight around my waist before I could say anything. "Mom's still mad," she said, muffled into my cardigan. "But I'm not." I held her a little longer than I needed to. Then I let go. Some women burn bridges. Others just stop walking toward them. Looking back, that was the visit I didn't know I needed. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. Today, the classroom was filled with autumn light. The bulletin board on the far wall carried student artwork, scribbles, leaves, uneven hearts drawn with conviction. I pinned a new quote above them, written in simple black marker on cream paper. "You matter, even when they pretend you don't." I stepped back and looked at it, letting the words sink in. Not for them, but for me. I slipped on my cardigan, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and opened the door just as the first students began to arrive. They greeted me with joy I hadn't earned from blood ties, but had earned just the same. And as I stepped into the rhythm of this new life, coffee rings, lesson plans, voices that didn't hurt, I understood something I'd only started to grasp that night under the lanterns. They didn't break me. They just proved I never needed their table to have my place. When someone tries to erase you, don't fight to be seen by them. Reclaim your space for you. You don't need a seat at their table if the cost is your dignity. So what about you? Have you ever stayed quiet too long just to keep the peace? Drop your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw stories like this one.